Hey everyone, Sean Frangella here again with a new After Effects animation tutorial about combining some Red Giant Trapcode plugins and specifically about how to use 3D Stroke to generate particles as it draws out a shape, as we're seeing in this example here. And this is using the Trapcode suite from Red Giant of Particular and Form and all those fun ones, which I use really often in professional work and can be some really fun stuff that you can do. So after you install those in After Effects, they end up over here in Effects, and specifically the two that I want to focus on is 3D Stroke, which we can see here will animate from start to end a vector path or text or something like that and bend it around, and Particular, which can animate particles emitting from a point, lights, or layers, and all this cool stuff like this. So here's our big final animation that we'll work towards, and in addition to those two, I did throw a star glow onto the whole thing, which is another one of these down in the suite. And here's another example of this working as the type animates and draws in. Particles are beginning to emit based on that line. So I teach these in a class in Chicago about animation, and the question came up of how could I use 3D Stroke to drive particle emission, and it stumped me for a bit, and I wanted to figure this out because I figured it had to be possible, and I couldn't think about it off the top of my head. So I did some work, did some research, and figured it out, and let's do this. So I'm just going to get started and make a new composition, Command N, and I'll call this 3D Stroke. And how 3D Stroke is working is if you have a solid or a layer with a path on it as a mask, it will draw that out. So I'm going to go to Layer, New, Solid, call this Stroke. And then the easiest way to get our text like we had it is to type it out in Illustrator. So I'm going to go into Illustrator, go to File, New, and I'll make this 1920 by 1080 so it matches up exactly. And I'm just going to get my text tool and use something like Gotham Bold because it'll be big and nice, and I'll type out particles, and I'll just scale that up and do a quick bit of kerning with the Option key just so it looks a little better. Not always necessary, but it bugged me. And to center this, I'm going to use Align to Artboard, which is under Window, Align. And I'm going to click this one to align vertical center and this one horizontal, and that's going to center it in my window. And all I need to do then is go to Type, Create Outlines, or Shift Command O, so it's Path, and then Copy, Edit Copy, or Command C. Back into After Effects, Paste, Edit, Paste, or Command V that onto my solid. So now we have all those vector paths as paths on one solid down here, and that's good. That's what we want. So to get this to work, we're going to go over to Effects and Presets, and we'll grab 3D Stroke and throw it onto this layer, and it's going to outline the path, and that's kind of our start. So what we need to do to make this work is we're going to, over here, use all path and stroke sequentially, which is important because then it's going to draw each letter and path at a time. How this is working is we have our thickness of the 3D Stroke, we have our default color, I'll just make it red for now, and we have our feathering as it's animating, and our start and end point, which are really what we're going to want to animate back and forth. Now, the big point of this is that it automates this drawing and process. So how this works is it starts at 0 and end point at 100. So if we want this to go to left to right, we would put start at 100 and then animate it from 100 to 0, and in this case it will go left to right. And a couple other things we can do is taper the start and end thickness of each line, which makes it look a little nicer and more interesting, as well as bend this whole thing in 3D space, which is kind of the cool part of this one and some of what makes this one neater beyond just drawing in the paths. In addition to that, with this effect, you can repeat it and have a bunch of these, which can be kind of cool. And you can do some stuff with internal opacity if you have multiple blending on top of each other, as well as point it to which camera to use, because it's a little different than the other Red Giant plugins like Particular and Form where you have to enable the camera, and Motion Blur, which will default the comp settings, which is fine. So to get this to do what we want, I'm going to unbend it, zoom out here, and all we're going to do for now is animate start point from 100, and then I'll just go ahead like 3 seconds, make another keyframe and make that 0. So now if I back up and just play with the 0 key, it's going to animate those sequentially, and that's good. That's pretty much what we want. The other thing we'll do is we'll turn on motion blur for both, so then as it's animating, you can see that it gets a little blurred, which is good. It's going to look a bit smoother. And for our main point of doing this, that's fine for now. That's all we need to do. So the magic of how this is happening is that these lines, as they come on, will drive particles. So how we want to do this is we're going to make a new composition, new composition. I'll call this container 3 because this is the third little time I've done this in my tests. And in this container, I'm going to go to layer, new, solid, and call this particular, but you could call it whatever you want, color it whatever you want. And on this one, I'm going to drop particular from my Red Giant folder, and I'm going to bring in that composition that I just made called 3D stroke. And what this is going to do is, through some settings, combine these two. So for particular, I'm going to go up here, and how this is working, as a quick explanation, is there's particles emitting, and we emit them from the emitter tab, decide what they look like in particle, add shadows and shading, move them around in physics, which is the big one using gravity, and that's all we're going to worry about for now. So how we're going to get this to work is, rather than an emitter type, we're going to use a layer, but the first thing we need to do is remember to make this composition that we just dragged in a 3D layer, because that's how this works in this case. Emitter type, we're going to go to layer, and that's going to open up this layer emitter, and then we're going to go to 3D stroke. And if I turn off my 3D stroke layer and scrub through, what's going to happen is particles are going to emit based on that, but there's not that many particles and there's not enough happening, so we're not going to see much yet. So I'm going to go to particles per second and put it way up at like 100,000 and see where that gets us. So now you can see that they're starting to show up a lot more as this comes on, and that's good. It's getting a bit clear. And let's bump that up even more, maybe like 300,000. We'll see if we can break my computer at the same time while we're doing this. So if I play this, still not very interesting, but we can see that our system is working. The particles are emitting from those points. But a couple things I want to fix. I do realize that I just put in 30,000, not 300. So I'm just going to change this to 80,000 so there's more. And we can see at the beginning there's not very many because particular starts emitting particles from 0. So one thing we want to change here is under emission extras, turn pre-run up to 100, and that's going to start emitting prior to the start of the comp, so there's already some there at the beginning. So that gives us a bit more. Again, it's not very interesting, so what we want to do is go through the process of under particle, change what the particle looks like, and then under physics, add some air resistance and have it moving around. So for the particle settings, I'm going to put the life at 5 so they last longer. I'm going to change the particle type to glow sphere just because that's a little more interesting. I'm going to turn up sphere feather a bit. I'm going to make the size quite a bit bigger, but then randomize the size so they come down and just kind of tweak these back and forth. I'm going to bring the opacity down a bit and then turn up opacity random so they're not all the same opacity. And then so they're generated smoothly, I'm going to change opacity over life to this little map so they fade in and then fade out smoothly. And I'm going to set the transfer mode to add. It's going to blend them a little into each other, and that's going to matter a lot when we start changing the color around as time goes on later. And I could mess with my glow settings and change that to add as well, and that's fine for now. So if I play this real quickly, they're coming on at the same time where they should be coming from. If I hide the 3D stroke layer and just play this, you can see that they're coming on, but they're not really relating to the letters and doing anything. So what I want to do is kind of have them animate up, as we saw in that example, as they're coming on. So to do that, I'm going to, on my particular layer, go down to this physics tab, leave it on air, but I'm going to make the gravity negative, and then they'll be floating up as they come. And what I want to do is add a bit of spin so they're randomly going around a bit. And then I'm going to use the turbulence field and use that to affect size so they kind of shift around in size, as well as position. And if we turn on this visualize fields, we can see how that's going to be affecting them. And that's just going to make it a little more interesting and a little more random. And one we're going to use later is this spherical field to get them to go out of the shot and then come back in. So if I turn on visualize fields and turn the strength and radius up, you can see that they're going to avoid this circle sphere. And this is useful because you can have them go away for something, or if you have like a planet and you want particles to kind of go around it, or a logo that's a circle and you want them to animate around, this can be a really useful one. So I'll just undo those for now, but we'll use that later. And I'll turn off visualize fields. And let's just do a quick play and we can see now it's working. And it might be a little too extreme, so I'm going to go back in and tweak those settings a bit. I'll turn gravity just like -40. Maybe not have my turbulence field affecting position so much. I'll just put those at some like 50, effect size maybe like 20. Play this again, and that's a little better, not as chaotic and crazy. Now what I can do is turn on motion blur for this as well, and then as these are coming up, they're gonna blur out. So if I had the gravity really negative, you can see that they're gonna be getting that blur, which is a good thing. So if I play this one, maybe this will look better anyway. So we'll see. We'll just wing this and see how it goes. It's getting that motion blur. So let's leave it at that one. I like it with actually more negative gravity and this motion blur on. And that's kind of the process with doing any of this sort of stuff, especially these plugins with so many settings, is you're kind of going back and forth, tweaking things, changing things. So now we have this working, it's generating the particles. This is great. We can keep going with this. And what's great about this is we have our container, which holds particular, and we have this 3D stroke, which is driving the particles. So they're still always going to relate to each other. So if I change this whole animation to 5 seconds, I can ease that in, and I can turn on things like this bend. So maybe it starts with it kind of bent like this and rotated this way. And then I'll just press U to show all keyframes. And then I'm going to animate, bend, and that Y rotation, U again. And then just drag those keyframes, bring them to the beginning. And what I'm going to do is then just later in time, zero each of those out. And then grab both of those, right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease in. And I think I'll have that whole thing start at 1 second so we can see some of the drawings start to happen. So I'll just move that over and play this real quick just to kind of demo how this can relate. We can see that this is going to be kind of flying into place in this example. And now if I go back to my container, the particles are going to match up to that. So this wasn't quite what I had in mind. So I'm going to go back in here and just quickly change this a bit. Maybe have it more bendy at the beginning, and maybe rotated further this way. Say this just goes crazy and is going totally back and forth. And I'll just drag these keyframes over, delete these ones, or just cut to get rid of them, and move the new ones into place. And that's a little more interesting. And then to smooth this out, I'm going to grab all those keyframes, go over here to my graph editor, make sure it's on edit speed, grab these two, pull this curve, and that's just going to smooth out that easing. So this is fine. That's enough to show the idea what's happening. So now if I go back to my container, we can see that the particles are following that around, which is awesome. That's the point of all of this, is that they're both 3D effects. 3D stroke is in 3D space with those particles way out there, and they're going to keep generating as that animates around. So the question was, how do we combine all of these? And using this layer emitter, we can figure it out and kind of go back and forth. So from here, it's just adding some extra details. And what I did with the other one, if we look here, is in addition to Starglow, there's some other stuff happening, because what's going on with this is it's generating the particles based on the layer visibility and color. So what I can do is go over to here, it's red, but if I do a layer, new adjustment layer, and drag hue saturation onto this, and then I'm going to check colorize, and that's going to colorize all layers below it, and I'm going to bump up the saturation so it's back to that bright color. And if I animate the color hue, it's going to animate through colors. So what I can do is use a quick expression on this by hitting Option and clicking, and then I'm just going to type in time, which will key up this value to the number of seconds in the comp. And I can do times with the asterisk, and something like 200 So it's going to multiply that value by 200 and basically scroll through these colors really quickly. So now if I go back to my container, that's also matching up with the particles. So those particles are now the color of this composition, and that is pretty cool. And what I can do is go even further with that is if I back in my 3D stroke, rather than just a color, what I can do is I have this grungy texture pattern, and what I'm going to do to make it even more interesting, and this could be any texture, it doesn't really matter, is I'm going to grab that, put that below the stroke in this 3D stroke container, line it up at the beginning, and then make this track matte alpha matte of the 3D stroke. So now not only are we getting the color shift, but what's being drawn out is those shapes plus this pattern. So on the 3D stroke, I'm going to go back in and just make this thickness a lot bigger so we can see what's happening. And you can see we're getting extra interest because it's actually a pattern from this image that's drawing out. So combining all this stuff can make a really interesting image. So now if I go back to container 3, again, it's generating that based on all of those changes. We didn't have to change anything in particular, and it did all of that. So now if I play this, you can see that it's updating all of that, and now maybe I'll go back and change this one over here to start animating at the beginning so it doesn't kind of sit there, so it's going to be swinging around. And I could keep adding animation to this. I could bend it maybe back then in the beginning, and then at the end it settles back to 0 and ease that one in. And again, the point of all this is that I can make these changes here, and they're going to update the particles coming out back over here. So that's pretty awesome. So now what we could do is just keep messing with these particles, make it more interesting looking. We could make these bigger, and that's obviously too big, but maybe something like 15. We could have totally different particles coming out. Maybe go back to 10 so it doesn't look too crazy, and I'll just turn off motion blur for now so we can work quicker. And maybe just turn this sphere feather down and maybe just off for now. And we'll do just something more interesting with motion graphics. That's looking pretty cool. It doesn't have to look like, you know, realistic blur stuff, but this is pretty cool. And all these adding together, which is why we set it on transfer mode add, is why they're all blending together, and that looks nice. So that was a little overboard. I'll maybe just do size like 15 and bring the opacity down a bit. And now if we scrub through this, is a lot coming on. They're all adding out of this. The last thing that I did in the example is at 5 seconds after this is all done, just playing around with some further stuff you can do with the particles. What we can do is use that spherical field over here, and I'll animate the strength and radius from 0, and then go ahead 1 second and turn those way up. So all the particles are going to go away from the center and kind of around the edge of our scene. And at the same time, I'm going to slow down the speed of all of this. So what we can do is this physics time factor is how all of this is being calculated together at a rate of 1. So if I animate that as well and turn this to something like 0.1, it's going to basically apply 1/10 of all of these values so we can slow down the whole time factor of everything. And that could be a really cool thing to play with. And then I'm going to go ahead another second and have them come all back in, and we'll see if this works. I'll have it in my head. And then I'm going to animate our wind Y from 0, and that's going to push them all down. And I'll go ahead like 20 frames and just turn that way up, holding shift. And that's going to, on top of the gravity being negative, push them all down, so then over time they will all fall out of the frame. And just to make this smooth, rather than getting into too much easing, I'm just going to grab all of them and do easy ease. And, you know, maybe I want my sphere feather back on. We can always tweak this stuff later, but I'll just go kind of with stars and stuff now. And then I'm going to press 0 to play this and see if this came out how I wanted it to at all. And I'll check motion blur on and just give this a second to run. We get our particles animating out of the letters, and they're coming, and there's motion blur on, and this is snapping, and then they all kind of shoot out and fall, and we're going to rain down until they're all gone. And I can keep tweaking this to kind of get to where I want it to go. That's kind of the point of you can keep customizing the particles, the 3D stroke. But one thing else I had on the other one is if we look in our Red Giant plugins that come with the Trapcode suite, some of these other ones I really like are ones like Shine and Starglow. So if we drop Shine onto our 3D stroke, we're now getting volumetric light rays from that too. So we could do something like make those all white under colorize, turn on shimmer so it animates, add transfer mode to add, make our ray length way bigger, change this colorize to alpha, and we could have this shooting out of the text as well as everything else happening. The other one that is kind of cool that I like a lot, not kind of cool, but pretty damn cool, it's a really fun one, is the star glow. So if I drop this on here, I get this star glowing effect. So what I can do is make the streak length really big, boost the light a bit, and these colors are fine, but I liked it with just one color. So I'm going to go to one color on both and just make that one color a white. So there's just kind of white streaks drawn from this. Maybe boost the light a bit more. Turn down the source opacity a bit so it's mostly just these stars or kind of in between. And these extra ones are kind of fun to play with. And what we could do is even add expressions to these too. So if I wanted the boost lights or the streak length to kind of be randomly going up and down, what I can do is option click on that. And then down here, I'll type in wiggle, left parentheses, and then we'll do amplitude, comma, magnitude, how many times a second, how much. So let's say 4 times a second, it's going to go 100 units. And I have no idea how this is going to work out, but maybe it'll look cool. And with all of that added up, I'll just play again. And that's wiggling a little too extreme, so I'm going to go back into that 3D stroke expression with hitting the E key a couple times until the expression shows up. And maybe I'll just do once a second, 25, so it's not changing it so much. And then maybe mess around with star glow a bit more. Have that maybe shimmering a little bit, which will kind of add this wiggle to it. Maybe go mess with these individual lengths, which can be fun. So if we have just only some of them, so I'll just do only the vertical and horizontal. So these up left and down left ones, I'll take those off. So we're just getting vertical and horizontal. And then I'll play again. And now we have all that going. This star glow is kind of animating. All the particles are coming. The whole thing's working. It's kind of going in and then shooting down, and we have all this working together. So that came out pretty close to my original example that I showed at the beginning. There was just a couple of different settings, and like I said, here's this other completely different example, and that's kind of the point of all of this, is that you can use this technique from a technical perspective and point particular at a separate layer comp with 3D stroke or anything in it really, and use it to drive these particles. And the particles can be whatever you want, the 3D stroke could be whatever you want, and it can be a really fun way to combine a bunch of these Trapcode plugins from Red Giant to do some pretty cool stuff, in my opinion. So I hope you like this one. It was kind of a different one, kind of really getting into the nitty-gritty of some of these plugins that I like to use. Be sure to check out some of my other animation and design tutorials, and as always, subscribe on YouTube and Vimeo /SeanFrangella and Facebook.com/Vital. And thanks for watching. I will see you at the next video, and we'll do some more fun stuff.